Welcome back, fellow jazz bums. Today we are going to review a new one-step reissue from IMPEX Records. They are putting out Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra. I did get this as a preview copy. I did reach out to AB over at IMPEX requesting this because I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan, and also there isn't that many audiophile reissues of Frank Sinatra. We had the Mobile Fidelity box, the Capitol box. They also put out some of the reprise stuff, single one-offs like Sinatra at the Sands. They did a bunch of other reprise things as well at MoFi. Those are all out of print. There was a classic records reissue of The Voice, the 12-inch The Voice, and then also Vinyl Please recently put out a 10-inch of The Voice. That was the 1948 LP. All of those are out of print. This is in print. There is the regular 45 that I believe you can get right now, and then for pre-order you can have this IMPEX one step. So before we jump into it, remember to like and subscribe. We also have the Jazz Bums Discord, so come and hang out with us there. And then we also have the Friday live stream, so come check us out there. That's on our YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe here as well. All right, so for this review, I wanted to go through a few different things. The first being kind of the historical aspect of this recording, of the artist, what he was going through and what they were trying to accomplish. Then I wanted to touch on the technical aspect and the session itself. And after that, we can talk about the one step and how it compares to the other pressings of this that I have. So when we think about this era, so this was originally put out in 1950. Sinatra's career was declining. So from 1949 to around 1953, before he signed with Capitol, as well as Columbia Pictures, there was a decline. So just his style in general wasn't as popular. And because of that, Mitch Miller, who came as the A&R guy from Mercury to Columbia, teamed up with Sinatra to figure out how they can kind of restart his career. And Mitch Miller is an interesting character because, well, one, he's the person who didn't renew Sinatra's contract, I think, in like 1952. And I think him and Sinatra really were not on the friendliest of terms before then, and then certainly not after then. And then also, Mitch Miller himself was an accomplished musician, classically trained, worked in many of the great orchestras in the 30s and I think 40s. Then he became the A&R person for Mercury. And he also was a session musician on a lot of jazz sessions, including Charlie Parker and strings. So that's his history. And what he was thinking of doing was making kind of a more jazz-oriented rhythm type album for Frank. And this is notable for a couple things. One, this some would argue this would be Frank's first concept record. Now, if you were to kind of search concept records, people do attribute the first one to Frank, and I believe it's mostly Wee Small Hours when he's in Capitol, that's 1955. This is 1950, and the concept is we're going to make a jazz-oriented themed record. It's going to be upbeat and swinging, up-tempo, and what they're going to do is couple Frank with George Saravo. And this is a notable change because up until this point for his Columbia recordings, Frank really worked with Axel Stordahl and did a lot of ballads. So this was, very kind of vocal focused, obviously, but lots of string arrangements and kind of big vocal numbers. So this is going to be a different style. And because of that, it really starts to establish where Frank is going to go in the coming years, notably with Capitol, which is what most people think of when they think of Frank Sinatra in terms of style and musical taste. So that's really important. Bringing in George Saravo is really important. And I did just have some things to show here. So we'll get into the format a little bit later, but these are some of the original 10-inch LPs that Frank put out, and these are all before the Sing and Dance session. So these are all with Axel Stordahl, and they all have that style for the most part. So we have, this one is Dedicated to You. We have Frankly Sentimental. These are all on that Columbia label there. Songs by Sinatra, Volume 1. There was never a Volume 2, so there's just this volume. And then the first one that he put out as a 10-inch LP. And this has a really interesting history. This is The Voice of Frank Sinatra. This is not the first 10-inch LP. The first 10-inch LP was a classical record. This was the first pop. So Columbia Records invented the 10-inch LP format, and for pop, they have the first one as The Voice of Frank Sinatra. This was originally a 78 set, and they put it on 10-inch. Just talking about the format for a second, when we think about the 78 album, what that really means is it's usually a set of 4 discs. Each side of each disc is one track, around like 3 minutes or so. So when you think of translating that to an LP, you have 8 songs, and there's 4 tracks on each of these. So this has 8 songs, and so do all of these have 8 songs. So that was kind of defined by what they could fit on a 78, and then how they produced the 78 album. So translating that to an LP produced this 10-inch record. Okay, so this was an effort by Mitch Miller to kind of revive Sinatra's career, give him a new arranger. This is also important because when Frank does leave and gets signed by Capitol, he also brings George with him as the arranger, although the arranger is attributed here to Nelson Riddle. So this is a UK pressing, so the cover's a little different. This is a 10-inch Capitol, and this is one of my favorite Frank Sinatra records. It doesn't get as much attention as a lot of the other ones, notably like Songs for Swingin' Lovers. Songs for Young Lovers captures his voice, I think, at his peak, and the songs are really fun. But this is attributed to Nelson Riddle, but if you actually dive deeper, all of the songs, I think except for one of them, is arranged by George Saravo. So the reason why I mention this is because this is kind of when they first start working together, and then they move forward together, and that is when Frank's style does change to that style that influenced so many and really kind of defined a genre of male vocalist in the mid to late 50s. So this is kind of the origin of that, and I think that it's notable and kind of fun because of that too. All right, so that is kind of like the history. Oh, the other thing is that just to take a beat on the fact that Sinatra's career was kind of going down. So I think in the early 50s, he divorced his first wife. Ava Gardner also left him. He lost his contract. Mitch Miller did not renew his contract with Columbia. And then MGM in 1950 also did not renew his contract or fired him. I'm not exactly sure exactly how that went down, but essentially he's really at a low point. And then Capitol picks him up, in 53. He also gets picked up by Columbia Movie Studios and puts out From Here to Eternity, which he wins an Oscar for. And really kind of his career goes on an upward trajectory in 1953. And if you ever hear Sinatra mention or anyone mention in the lore of Sinatra, the great comeback, this is what they're referring to, is his popularity kind of pre-war, during the war, and post-war, that decline where everybody kind of leaves him in his personal life and professional life. And then in 1953, it starts to take off again. And then you have those great Capitol years. Okay, so let's get into the technical history, because this is, I think one thing to note is that this is a one-step. So people who are purchasing this will probably tend to be interested in the sonics of it. And what is notable is that this is a session, I think there's a few different sessions in 1949. This is put out in 1950. This, I believe, is the first Sinatra record that was recorded with the intent to be first on a 10-inch LP, not 78s. Although I think it did come out on 78s, as well as like a set of 7 inches as well, just because there was like a format war back then. But kind of the high fidelity version would be the 10-inch LP, and that was the intent here. This is also when Columbia brings in their first tape machine. So this is recorded to magnetic tape, which is also notable. So this is 4950. There's also, in my own collection, I have a Duke Ellington record from 1950 that was originally recorded to tape, and they were able to take advantage of how long they would be able to record for, because the current standard was a 16-inch transcription disc, which is also important for this session too, because the magnetic tape was not necessarily, it was going to be the new standard, but the engineers were still getting familiarized with it. So even though they recorded these sessions to tape, they also had kind of a safety set of recordings to the transcription disc, which was also used by Chuck Granata, who's one of the producers on this. He's a Sinatra historian, but he's also part of Sony. He oversees the Sinatra catalog that they have, so pretty much up until the Columbia contract ends, and as well as other things too. This is actually Charles Granata, or Chuck Granata's book. This is Sessions with Sinatra. This goes through his entire recorded career. And if you're into collecting Sinatra records, or just interested in the recording aspect of it, this is an essential companion to that. So highly recommend Chuck's book here, Sessions with Sinatra. Definitely one to check out. So the reason why this is important is that this, when I was listening to a couple interviews with Chuck, and he was saying that when he found the tape, because they reissued this in the past, but they always used the backup tape or other sources. For this, they found the original master tape, or tapes. I think there may have been, I don't know if there's multiple tapes, but there's multiple sessions, and we'll get into kind of the uniqueness of this session as well, because there's something special about this that they do that's actually pretty controversial for the time. But they're recording to tape. It's true high fidelity. It is mono, and they have these transcription discs. So they're in the studio, and another thing to point out is that Frank was singing at, I think, the Copa Room in New York, as well as other things that he was committed to. He had his radio broadcast. He had other things going on, and he had issues with his voice, serious issues like hemorrhaging of vocal cords. So what Mitch Miller said is, don't worry about it, Frank. What we're going to do is we are going to record the music itself, and then you could come in later and overdub your voice, which was different and controversial. And the reason why is because the Musicians Union did not allow for this. They didn't allow for overdubbing for contractual reasons, how people were getting scheduled for studio time. The idea of bringing in a musician just to record a single thing, they just didn't have that worked out. So they basically had this second session where Frank came into the studio, and it wasn't known. And I think Mitch Miller even hired a guard to stand outside of the door, is how he tells the story. And so Frank could come in, because if the Musicians Union found out about this, they would have closed down the session, and they would have been fined, and it would have been a mess. So this is 2 magnetic tape. It uses overdubs. It's also on the 33 format on vinyl. So this is also a transition period for when people were using their 78 players and shellac, which was noisy. They were also using the 16-inch transition disc, which could be noisy as well, to magnetic tape, using the benefits of that, like the ability to do overdubs, and then also the 33 vinyl LP, which sounded quieter. So in terms of like recording history, this is a kind of a notable, document. So it's pretty cool to hear how great this thing sounds. And I'll get into the sonics later, but it's just, the recording history is pretty interesting. Mitch Miller's involvement and kind of this clandestine approach to recording this kind of makes for a great story. So, okay, now let's get into how this thing actually sounds. So the other thing to note is because this is a 45, this is a double 45, they had some extra space. So Chuck Granata and A.B. Fawn, they had some other material from a 51 session with Harry James. So if you know kind of Frank Sinatra's history, when he first started out in big bands, he worked for Harry James before he moved over to Tommy Dorsey. And then from there, he moved to, then Columbia signed him, and then he started working with Axel Stordahl. And I'm sure there were other arrangers and conductors that were in between. But because of that, they have these, I think it's 2 or 3 songs by Harry James from 1951. And these are such highlights within this one-step reissue, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we get into kind of the sonic differences, let's actually look at this packaging. All right. So first of all, it comes in this one-step textured package with a really nice hype sticker that has Frank's picture on it. So that just tells you a little bit of detail on what, how they sourced it and how many numbers. So they're doing 5,000. It's a 2LP, 45 RPM, pressed at RTI on the VR900 Super Vinyl. So that's, if you hold up the vinyl to the light, you can see it's translucent, and it sounds great. It's mastered by Chris Bellman and Andres Meyer with the original analog sources. So this is the box it comes in. This is the jacket itself. The jacket is nice, and it is notable that it does differ slightly from the regular 45 that IMPEX put out. So you can see this one obviously has a white border. This one doesn't. It has, I think, what's supposed to be like a coffee table book style. So there's a really nice set of liner notes in here that provides all of the recording details. It has historical perspective information. It has all of the people that worked on it. There's nice pictures in here. There's pictures of the tape in here. And they do a really great job of presenting this. It talks about each session. It tells you all the details, when it was recorded, who was the orchestra. It's really well done. So they put some flyers in here from some concerts. These are I mentioned that this also came out as a 7-inch. So there was a 7-inch format. These are all of the labels for the 7-inch. So they do a great job in terms of documenting this session. And there's a portrait on the back there. So great job. And I believe when you order this, it will come with one of these stickers. So this is a promo, so it doesn't have that, but they're pressing 5,000 of these, so you'll also get a numbered copy. The records themselves, they have a different label, so it has the one-step label. And I don't believe I'm going to be able to have it so you can see that it's translucent, but if you can see my hand, you see like my finger there? That indicates it's that VR900 vinyl. And the other disc here is just a different colored label. So how does this thing sound? All right, I have the IMPEX 45. I also have the original 10-inch. And the original 10-inch definitely has reverb put on it. It sounds good, but it doesn't compare to what the IMPEX versions sound like. Not even close. It sounds okay, though. I mean, his vocals sound a little, in terms of high fidelity, they're not as crisp, that's for sure. I know a lot of people say it sounds like, you put a blanket over your speaker. There's a little bit of that going on here. This also may have been a really worn copy. This thing is like VG condition. Also, the band itself, you could hear, sounds different because they do put reverb on it, which actually it doesn't sound that bad, but the band, it's not as clearly defined. The sound stage isn't as wide. The instrumentation isn't as notable and distinct. And yeah, I mean, I would say Frank does sound like he's in front of the group, but it's, it's pretty even actually. It's kind of all kind of working together. And it kind of creates an atmosphere too, which actually is pretty nice. It's not a terrible sounding record. It sounds okay. All right. So I thought the difference between this 33, the regular 33 against the 45 one-step would be marginal, but it is not. It is completely different. The clarity that is on this IMPEX one-step is so revealing. The resolution is just extremely high. You can it sounds like it's a modern recording. I mean, his voice sounds like he's right there. So it just sounds incredible. Also, they do add some extra bonus material on this. Side 4 is just the session tape running, and you hear Frank talking about how he's basically directing the session. So he talks about the trombone players and how there's 6 of them, and where he wants the mic positioned, how he wants them to play into the mic. So I think it's a double-sided mic, so I'm assuming it's 3 and 3 on each side. How the bass drum is mic'd up, how much they're putting in the bass drum to mute it. He is giving all this direction. So that is notable as well, because I just don't think that's a usual thing for artists of this time, where he's producing this. He's in the studio and he's basically setting up where the instruments are, where the miking is, and how the musicians should be playing into the mics. So that's pretty neat. There's also the fact that there's the tape dubbing. So when I first listened to this, I didn't realize it was tape dubbing. I just thought the musicians kept playing back and back. But really what it is you have the tape playing, Frank's vocals going over it, and then they stop, he wants another take, they rewind it, and then they start it again. And they do that a few times, so you can hear that as well. And it's just interesting to hear him. I think he's 34, 35 at this time, and he's in total command, even though, you have like Mitch Miller there, and you have George Saravo there. He is clearly, the person that is directing everything. So it's pretty cool to hear that. And I think it's a great document. If you're a fan of Frank Sinatra, I think this is a must-have. It's just a fun listen. You get those Harry James sessions where Harry James's trumpet sounds crystal clear on it. I think what A.B. was saying is that they had to go through 8 or 9 lacquers because his trumpet was so bright that it was distorting everything. So in terms of QC, this thing they made sure that everything sounds great on this. They had Chris Bellman go through it, 8 or 9 times just to get it right. So this thing does sound exceptional. Really blown away by it. I'm so happy to have it in my collection. And I hope that Chuck and A.B. work together to put out more of Frank Sinatra's material on Columbia. In addition to this, I hope that the Sinatra estate thinks about doing audiophile stuff of his Capitol and Reprise work as well. I think that it would be a great thing to be able to have his entire Capitol catalog, AAA, and in a format that's similar to this. I would love to see that. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you're going to pre-order it. If you did get it, what you think about it. And yeah, I'll talk with you later. Thanks.